Do you guys even remember what we're looking at in class?
Was it like
What ship went intercepted?
What?
What ship went intercepted?
Oh yeah,
Did you say the bush?
like 20 flash pages.
I purposefully started here so that you would remind yourself of where we were at as far as this class is concerned. We were looking at major mistakes made by the U.S. military during the Second Persian Gulf War, and I'm showing you, I've got more. Remember these pictures? The mistakes made compounded upon the fact that they took pictures of it, and these pictures became global because of the web. Pictures of torture, although is an interesting question. Is this person being tortured, or does he just think he's being tortured? Is the illusion of torture torture? Because the fact is that this battery wire isn't hooked up to a battery. It's not hooked up to anything. So are you being tortured, or do you just think you're being tortured? Any of you been to Disney World?
Yeah.
Did you ever go on that ride where you think you're flying, right? Like you're just looking at a big movie screen, right? I think you're on a hang glider or something. Are you flying? No, you're not flying. But you think you're flying. Are these people being tortured, or do they just think they're being tortured, but they're not actually being tortured? Is mental torture torture? And how about this one? The more Swiss cheese, the more holes. The more holes, the less cheese. Therefore, the more cheese, the less cheese. Find your way out on that one, Obama. Just some more pictures here. It's a heavy subject. Stripping Iraqi prisoners of war naked in front of American females. That's taboo. Making them simulate homosexual acts. That's very taboo. We live in a culture where it's sort of private. It's no one's business what you do in the privacy of your own home. That's not true in other parts of the world. So making them engage in what they consider taboo behavior and then taking pictures of it, that's all review. So here's where we're at. The situation is that the world sees the Americans in a negative way. The American military was trying to do a good thing here, rid the world of a dictator, get rid of weapons of mass destruction, protect the Kurds, all these things that we had already talked about. But this is what the world saw, which takes us to this event. It's not on the level of 9/11, but it's sort of the same. It's in the same realm. It's the central event. Everything leads up to this, and this leads to everything after. And how many of you have seen this picture before? You've actually seen this picture before. Most Americans would not recognize this because it's just not an important part of your life. But if I showed you the Twin Towers, that means something to you. If I showed you Pearl Harbor, that means something to you. It's part of your DNA as an American. This is part of Iraq's DNA, this event. That's the before, and that's the after of a bombing inside this shrine. How many of you are Catholic? You don't have to answer that. But if you're Catholic, where the Pope lives, right? The Vatican. That is the church for Catholics. Or if you're Jewish, the wall where the ancient temple was in Jerusalem. It's the spot. Or if you're Buddhist, find one of those amazingly large statues of Buddha in India or parts of China. This is a shrine. It's a Muslim shrine, which was blown up. And you can see totally destroyed. You can see the aftermath of a bombing that happened inside of it. So we'll talk about this in just a second. What I've talked to you about before as far as the Second Persian Gulf War is that the U.S. went in for various reasons. Saddam was a dictator, the belief that they had weapons of mass destruction, the belief that the Kurds needed to be liberated, right? We've talked about all this. This should sound familiar to you, yes? By 2006, there were 3 different wars going on at the same time in Iraq. 3 different wars. Why are you on your phone? War number 1 was the insurgency. Remember, the Iraqi army was dismissed, but they were allowed to keep their guns. But they were not allowed to get jobs because if you were part of the Ba'ath Party, you were not allowed to get a job in American-controlled Iraq. So you had unemployed, armed, former Iraqi soldiers. Unemployed, armed, former Iraqi soldiers. They started the underground resistance. Remember when we talked about the KKK? That was the tough part. Beating the Confederate Army during the Civil War was the easy part. Beating the KKK, same people. It's just that they went underground. Same thing. Beating the Iraqi army, piece of cake, few weeks. But now they're insurgents. Now they're underground. I don't mean that literally. I mean they hide. They hit and run. They blow up cars. They blow up highways. They blow up churches. And then they blend into the population, right? They hide in plain sight. You know what I mean? Okay. Well, they're taking on the U.S. military. So the U.S. military is taking on the former Iraqi army that is engaging in basically acts of terrorism, right? They've already defeated Iraq, but they haven't defeated the underground resistance to American occupation. Just like, again, think about the Union Army, beat the Confederacy, but then took the next several decades to beat the KKK. That's what's going on here. War number 2. Big idea here. The American military is in Iraq. There's where the American military is. It's 2006. 9/11 is 5 years old. 9/11 has happened. We haven't talked about it in here yet, but we will. It's 5 years old. There were people who believed in 9/11 that they said, yes, we've hit at the Americans. 5 years later, you're one of those people. You live in the Philippines or something, and you believe that the Americans are the scourge of the earth. Now, where do you go to attack Americans? Iraq. That's where you go. That's where you go to hit them. Of course, you might go to America, but American security is pretty good since 9/11. Where do we know that there are Americans that we can attack? We know they're in Iraq. So people from all over, including, by the way, the U.S., went to Iraq to take on the American military. These are the fundamentalists. These are the people that believed in 9/11 and they wanted to attack Americans. They went to Iraq. Notice, why'd they go to Iraq? Why'd they go there? To fight Americans. In other words, who was there first? Between the U.S. military and Islamic fundamentalists who believed America is the great Satan, who was in Iraq first? Americans were there first. But it became, do you understand that this is important because this becomes part of the military effort of the United States after 9/11, but not because the Americans went to where the terrorists were. They came to where we were. We were there first. Then the terrorists came to attack Americans. So you're talking about 2 different groups here. Former Iraqi soldiers and people from all over who went to Iraq to attack Americans because that's where they were. And that's where they could be got. Yes, dear.
I got you.
It's like the NCAA tournament, 4 number 1s. No, I made a mistake. But thank you. War number 3. The Iraqis killing each other. That's what this is. The Sunnis were fighting the Shiites. The Sunnis were fighting the Shiites. Specifically, this is a church. It's not a church, it's a mosque. It's called the Golden Dome. You can see why. It is a Shiite mosque. It is
How do you spell mosque?
Mosque. Okay. It is considered a holy site. You Christians, you've heard of what are called pilgrimages. You travel long distances to see some great historical religious artifact. In the Vatican I was in Rome for my junior year of college, which I highly recommend that. All sorts of artifacts. I saw the crown of thorns, supposedly. Right now, as a skeptic, I would say that's the crown of thorns, huh? That's it right there. Somehow it survived, but there are people that believe it. Right? This is a shrine. Muslims from around the world travel there. It's the central location, and it got blowed up. Now the question is, who done it? Throw out a theory. America did it. Yes. Why? Very good. There is a narrative. There's a point to this little lesson I'm engaging in. The truth is something happened, but it doesn't matter what the truth is. It's what people believe. And there's a significant portion of the population on earth that believes the American military did that so that these Muslims would kill each other. We'll blow it up. We'll blame it on that group. Then that group will attack that group. Did you need it? Of course.
Thank you.
Your
Put your
man with a smile on his face.
We're gonna leave in 10 minutes.
What I like is that he waited.
I bet you Madagascar.
All right, Will, keep going.
Having in Madagascar.
That means he really likes you if he came all the way.
Give me another theory.
So it would seem.
Go ahead.
I was planning on leaving in 10
The
minutes.
Sunnis did it to anger their hated enemies, the Shiites. Give me another theory. Yes. Yes. The Shiites blew up their own building. And if you think that's crazo, there are Americans who believe the U.S. government did 9/11.
They did.
That the Bush administration did it so that they could blame some Middle Eastern terrorists so that the U.S. could invade Afghanistan.
Jet fuel can't melt steel beams.
Okay. 3 different wars going on. Number one, and number 2. Can you understand how this became a rather confusing war? Right? The U.S. military is fighting different groups, former Iraqi soldiers, members of Al-Qaeda, and then the Sunnis and the Shiites are killing each other, and the U.S. military can't let this happen. It becomes what's called a quagmire, not the character from the cartoon. Does anyone know what quagmire means? It's a quagmire. Vietnam was a quagmire. Vietnam, the weird thing about Vietnam was it was not a frontal war. You know what I mean? In World War II, the Americans started over here in France and then moved eastward, got to Germany. That didn't happen in Vietnam. Vietnam, the Americans were kind of everywhere, and so was the enemy. There was no front. And so the enemy is anywhere, and the enemy is nowhere. That's what Iraq became, a quagmire. Where's the enemy? Who knows? There's no front to drive. So this is the situation. Don't write this down, but President Bush in 2006 said, look, we got to figure out what we're doing here. He then created 5 different task force. You are going to sign up for one of these. And he said, look, I want you to make a recommendation about what we should do in Iraq. It's 2006. What should we do? 1/5 of you will propose that the U.S. withdraw immediately. Do you think the U.S. should have withdrawn immediately from Iraq in 2006? If that's you, I want you to sign up for this one. So there's 5 different things. There's about 30 of you. So about 6 of you per group. There was another group that says, no, what we should do is train Iraqis, and then when 1,000 Iraqis are ready, withdraw 1,000 Americans. When another 1,000 Iraqis are ready, withdraw another 1,000 Americans, just like we did in Vietnam. The Americans trained the South Vietnamese army, and then as the South Vietnamese were trained, the Americans withdrew that many soldiers. Okay? Do you think that was a good idea? If you do, sign up for that one. The third proposal was divide Iraq into thirds. Just split them up. Look what we did in Korea. Split it up. Look what we did in Germany. Split it up. If it worked in those two, why can't it work in Iraq? Create a Kurdish part, a Sunni part, and a Shiite part, and put Americans between them. There, problem solved. You think that's a good idea? Then sign up for that one. Another part was put more soldiers in. If the problem is there aren't enough American soldiers, then put more in. Add soldiers. You think that's a good idea, or you think you're creating more targets? Think it's a good idea? Sign up for that one. And option number 5 is do nothing. We're fine. We Americans are notoriously impatient. When we send soldiers in, we immediately wonder the next day, why haven't we won yet? We're America. Right? But other parts of the world are not as impatient as us. They see this as a 1,000-year struggle. They'll lose the battle, but win the war, sort of thing. Maybe we should take a page out of that notebook and just be patient. It'll work. You think that's a good idea? Sign up for that one. You are picking one of these 5. Okay? Give you a minute. Figure out which one you would like to be. We need about 6 per team-ish. If it ends up being 5 and another group ends up being 7, I can live with that. Okay? So, no, not as a table, as an individual. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, team 1, here's team 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. See that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I say so, 1s, you'll assemble at that table. 2s, you'll assemble at this table. 3s, you'll assemble at that table. 4s, you'll assemble at this table. Let's change that. So 1s, 2s, 3s. So that's partition. 4s, 5s. So that will be withdraw now. This will be train and retreat. That will be partition. That will be add soldiers. And that will be do nothing. Go. Try and realize if there's too many people at a table that you should go somewhere else. 6-ish. Solve your problem. Solve your problem. Don't worry about if you're on a team that you don't believe in. Who cares?
Which one's search for?
That would be 4, right? So that one's this one. Can we have at least 2 more people argue that we need to withdraw immediately? 2? Total group of 3?
That's bad tactics. Yeah, that's bad tactics. I can't lower myself.
Fine, I'll help him. Okay. So listen, I just have 2 more things to tell you, and then you'll have the rest of the hour to sort of operate. One is there's a Kia test now available on the Persian Gulf Wars. Open note, open book, open Google, take it multiple times. It'll show you your answers after you take it the first time. You can take it again. I don't understand why anyone doesn't get a perfect score on these things, but hey, I'm not you. That will be recorded into Infinite Campus by Friday. Today is Monday. It'll be recorded Friday. If you're not done by Friday, it goes in as a 0 until you do it. So I don't really care when you do it. I'm just saying it's going into Infinite Campus by Friday. Okay. As part of that is an essay. Don't be scared. I'm not worried about, are you creating complete sentences? For all I care, you can make bulleted answers. There are something like 20 different essay questions. You pick one. You pick the one that you think you've got the best chance of answering, and you simply answer it. That's 2 different tests. One is a regular objective test on the Persian Gulf. Click on it. There will be something like 15, 20 questions. Read them over, pick the one you want to answer, and then answer it. And again, I'm not worried about grammar and sentence structure or any of that. Just get your ideas across however you want. Now, in anticipation, I know what the questions are. And so I'm going to anticipate what some of you will be thinking after you read them. And so here's my answer. Yes, I'm serious. You'll understand. The rest of the hour is you preparing for a simulation that we are going to have in this class tomorrow. President Bush will be seated right here. And you will give President Bush your recommendation and why. There's 2 things going on. And the reason why it's okay that you have multiple people at your table. Somebody at your table, let's go with table. Somebody at your table will argue, Mr. President, we should do this and here's why. Blah, 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 blah. And then somebody else at your table will stand up and say, Mr. President, the reason we shouldn't do, let's say that you're option 1, you will stand up and say, here's why we should do what we think. And then somebody else at your table will stand up and say, here's why we shouldn't do this one. Blah, 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 blah. Sit. Somebody else at your table will stand up and say, here's why we shouldn't do this one. Blah, 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 blah. Sit. Somebody else at your table will stand up and say, here's why we shouldn't do this one. Here's why we shouldn't do this one. In other words, each team has 5 responsibilities. Why we should do the one you signed up for, and why we shouldn't do each one of the other options. And what makes your presentation good is actual historical evidence. Another time when that idea was done that worked or didn't work. And that's what I will be going around sort of throwing out suggestions about times when it worked and the times when it didn't work. If your group wants to make some sort of a visual presentation, great. That's fine. You don't need to, but you can. It's just fine. Porta potties are right there. So your first job is to elect a leader. Your second job is to divide who's doing what. And then you've got the rest of the hour to work on either the objective test, the essay test, or this simulation, which is in class tomorrow.
Is the essay also due Friday?
Yes. Oh, do it.
Okay.
Okay? Rest of the hour is all yours. I will float. Oh, will somebody in your team write down what your idea is in bold, and then everybody on your team, the names. Names of everybody on your team. Okay? And then give it to me.
All right. What's our
You didn't have to be here by yourself. If you wanted to.
No, we didn't.
You waited for the self.
No, it's like, the one that.
Why don't you join that? I will be the champion of Get Out Fast. By the way, I am not President Bush tomorrow. That's someone else.
very
I'm not saying.
It's actually pretty good, guys.
Why do you keep taking one? We can't hide that for you.
Okay.
Oh.
So, just some ideas for this
fast
week. Training. You're already in historical training.
I went through.
What we talked about is why would you do that with a Why wouldn't we do the same idea with the conversion?
Always do it for
However, it has worked in other situations. Basically, the U.S. goes in and trains the local population. They take the fight as a result. Americans at this time. But also the local population sees that their people are the ones doing the fighting, so they're more likely to join. It becomes their conflict rather than an American. So the suggestion, for example, is the Americans invaded Ireland.
No, it's not. Wait, what is your research?
Okay.
That's
pretty much the other one.
Vietnam War, we lost.
Yeah.
First one, it doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share.
Search
I'll
forward.
let you chime in.
Yeah, I'm World War II.
That's
If I 22 million.
So, subdivide.
Oh, that's good.
I'll take your piece of paper list, like right on this front table here.
There was no support for the war.
No one hated the deal.
Rations at home.
Jacob, what do you want to do?
We're getting retreat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and then we have, that means one
Yeah,
of
just
the
gets spit on. It's called the final art.
Do you want to speak or not?
Honestly, not really.
Okay, then we'll name Carson. Carson is gonna talk about digging
That wants to
in.
secede from that country. The obvious example. Just getting over the same.
You're going to
Why is
Vietnam.
it
You're going to Vietnam, buddy.
okay? You know, the parts of the world.
Because then, as soon as we.
So again, your job is to figure out who's gonna
Start fighting with each
throw
other. And it's still
pray for
problems.
our idea, and then who's going to say
And
who.
like we want the Americans to lose.
So yours is a search board, in other words, add what's home. Find out what's home. And if we're not talking about first person, right? It was an overwhelming success. Basically named the war in two. We would have more soldiers than the other thing. Probably
Chris Carson, we need to tell you.
that you're gonna have to address is more Americans who are need. This has become a war of targeting Americans. All these insurgents are coming in. You put in more Americans, even more forces.
I know, separate them, and then you
No, sometimes, like, think of a gang.
Yeah, it's
Sometimes cops will do is not add more cops, but when they add more cops, the gangs will say, we have more cops, let's pour in. They'll use this information. So that the gang will say, oh, how are you gonna answer that? Okay, so you guys need to figure out who's gonna say hooray for our idea, and who's gonna hit the other. You guys divide it however you want. Okay, I'll take that piece of paper on that table. So, you know who's going to be radar idea and who's going to be. So, so this is for everybody. If you want to call me over and say, hey, can you give us a war where this idea didn't work? That's my job. I will be happy to help you. Okay? Otherwise, you got about 15 minutes to think about what your presentation tomorrow is going to look like. Or do the personnel board tests.
He's gonna be sitting there.
I don't know, I feel like.
I'll take attendance
Never
sheets.
used those slides?
Yeah, if you wanted to make something visual, that's fine. So I won't make a flash for the just like.
I wanna know if Sophia
Is this accurate?
I'd like to.
So this is.
Oh, wait, no, they were.
Started with this one trade. I suppose this calculation is more soldiers in Europe. Oh, yeah. This calculation is. The United States is trying to convince the world they just did not believe in it. It doesn't matter how many soldiers. The war for the hearts and the minds. More soldiers. Convince the Iraqis that we're right. Your idea is the best. Yeah,
Okay, so you said, like, what would, where did you say was the
That's true. Training and retreating. Yeah, almost any conflict during the Cold War largely involved American body training. The Afghan Civil War against the Soviets. Americans weren't in Afghanistan. Fighting the Soviets. Afghans were fighting the Soviets. They still won. The United States still provided training.
There's some war we're digging in. Stupidity is digging in is you're looking at a situation and you're not fixing it. You're spending this money. You're not making any adjustments. That's like being behind at halftime of a football game, 21-0, and the coach saying, we're fine. No, you're not. Right? So hitting that confident would be a good deal. You did?
Yeah, why did you?
You still have 10 minutes. People, this does not have to be, it doesn't need to be PowerPoint incredible. It's, here's why we're right. Here's where that idea is wrong. Here's an example of why we're right. Here's an example of why they're wrong.
That one's digging. There's some portions that.
Is there actually something that's
Yeah, he retreats and he moves the wall. Yeah, but I'm just saying, if he retreats, he's just moving.
I don't know. Get it.
And you know,
And that's what I did.
Right here. Thank you.
I should have